On today's episode of There's a Floodlight That Never Goes Out, we speak to broadcaster Adam Oxley about things ranging all the way from his career in broadcasting, how clubs across our region are viewed, and also a little bit about keeping the peace on football heaven. I think you'll enjoy this one if you're a purist, and I think you'll enjoy this one if you're a fan of the South Yorkshire clubs.
Hello guys, welcome back to the There is a Floodlight That Never Goes Out podcast. As always, I'm joined by Tom and Ed, and today I'm very pleased to say we're joined by Radio Sheffield Adam Oxley. How are you, Adam?
I'm very well, thank you very much. Appreciate the invite.
No worries. So today we're going to be speaking to Adam about his current role while looking at all things South Yorkshire football. So Adam, let's get straight into it. So a little bit about you. Could you please tell us what your current role is and sort of how did you get there?
Oh, well, great question. I mean, my job title is a journalist for the BBC on the sports team at BBC Radio Sheffield. I've worked for Radio Sheffield now for full-time for about 2.5 years and freelance for coming up to 16 years now, which is quite frightening, if I'm being brutally honest. So yeah, I mean, my role at the minute essentially is commentating, covering football matches, covering local sports news stories, presenting our Football Heaven show Monday to Friday. I also co-present our Sports Academy show on a Tuesday. News bulletins we obviously do on a daily basis across Radio Sheffield as well. So they're pretty much the main sort of tasks that we do. How did I get here? Well, I did a journalism degree at the University of Sheffield and graduated in 2005. Same year that I started freelancing for Radio Sheffield. Always wanted to sort of get into some kind of media, and being a big sports nut, sports media was always the way I wanted to go. And thankfully, because I banged on about it in my course for 3 years, somebody from Radio Sheffield, Seth Bennett, contacted the university and said, "Can you recommend anyone?" And thankfully, they put me forward. So I worked behind the scenes for a year. Then they got me out doing some games. For a couple, did Barnsley for a decade, and all the while working for South Yorkshire Police, initially in admin and then in PR. So had to wait a long time to get full time and get in, but finally, a couple of years ago, job came up when Jonathan Buchan and Rob Staten left, and thankfully I was successful and eventually managed to land a job that I'd always wanted. So yeah, no, it's a dream job, and I am very lucky and feel very honoured and privileged to be able to do it.
Well, I think as a keen listener of Football Heaven, I think one of the things that fans always want to know, I'm sure, I don't know if you mind answering this question, is what club do you support? Because fans always they think there's inherent biases. So what club do you actually support?
Well, I support all 6 local teams.
Here we go.
There you go. What I would say on this matter is Mike is very open about supporting Leicester City.
Yes.
Andy is very open about supporting Halifax Town. I've never talked about who I support. So that may lead you to think that I historically support one of our local teams, but I also would say that does that impacts how I do my job and how I call a football match? No, absolutely not. But what it also means is that I'm from the area, I'm passionate about the area, and I genuinely want all of our teams to do well. Because if our teams are doing well, then it means they're in higher divisions, and it means that the games that we get to cover are even better. So, the fact that we look like we're going to lose Sheffield United from the Premier League, well, that means that we don't get to commentate on Premier League football unless Barnsley manage to complete the absolute ridiculous journey that they're on this year. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer the question. Because unfortunately, I'd love to answer the question. It's a really good discussion point, but there's just too many people out in this part of the world that would accuse me of bias even more, if that makes any sense. So
I understand.
So there you go. There's the politician's answer around that subject.
So
Um,
after
yeah,
you,
go
Tom.
on.
Sorry, after you.
All right, after me. So if you can't mention sort of the clubs that you support, what would you say was your best football memory before you started commentating on the games? Because I think you've mentioned on your Twitter a few times that you attended Sheffield FC matches. So what would you say is your favourite football memory before you start commentating on the games?
I mean that's a great question, and that potentially would give away who I support. But let's go. I've always liked non-league stuff, and my sort of growing up, I was a football nut. I played junior football. I've played five-a-side now since like 2003, regularly, a couple of times a week, and I always loved when I wasn't going to games locally in the stands, going and watching my dad play. I've talked a lot about my dad who passed away a couple of years ago, and honestly, like growing up, the times when I got to go and watch him play 11-a-side on a Saturday were just brilliant. Because he just loved the game and everything else, and he loved it when he could come in later years and go comment, on trips with me to some grounds when we managed to make that work. But equally, just such fondness sort of looking back, playing with my dad and going to watch him play. So, football's just been such a huge part of my life. Don't get me wrong, I love sport across the piece, and that's why my current job's brilliant, because I could happily sit down and watch cricket or rugby or tennis or whatever, because I'm just a sport nut. But football's always been right at the top in terms of our family, and playing it, watching it, and just consuming as much of it as we possibly can.
Yeah.
Yeah, Adam, obviously with your role, perhaps on football, it can get quite heated, as I'm sure many would agree. How hard is it to sort of keep the peace and keep it professional? Because, obviously I won't repeat some of the stuff that I've heard said, but we all know infamous comments in the past. How sort of hard is it to keep the peace?
Honestly, the phone-in was the thing I was probably most nervous about when I got the job full-time.
Yeah.
I've never hosted a phone-in, and it's probably the aspects of the job that I still get most nervous about now. I get nervous about everything. I've talked about mental health a lot on the show and in the past as well, so that's just part of my character, and everybody gets nerves. But because the phone-in is an hour, you go into it and you can prepare as much as you can in terms of you have some audio ready in case you don't get a call for a little while. You get your head around sort of the stories involving the local clubs and the news of the day, and you write yourself an intro. But then literally the show can go wherever the callers take it, which is why the show's brilliant, and it is again an absolute honour to be able to present it, and praise or grumble the same on a Saturday. But you just have to be on your guard. I mean, this comes down to your journalism training anyway, in terms of defamation and watching what people say that could land you in with issues legally. So you've just got to be very careful if people start criticising individuals or making allegations or those kind of things. That you've got to be very careful about. But obviously, if people get very heated, then they might use fruity language that may offend other people. I had one recently that was a brilliant call that somebody actually stopped me at Hillsborough, like wound the window down, and said, "Oh, were you doing it?" Because I was in a Radio Sheffield car. Were you doing phone-in the other night? Because that call were amazing. I was like, I was, and it was brilliant until he said something daft towards the end of it. Just a term that shouldn't be used anyway, and you certainly can't use on radio. So you're always like, if you get a passionate caller, you've just got, it's that fine balance between letting them go, because they will forget that they're live on the radio. And obviously, if they say something or do something or whatever else, then it's our responsibility. So you do have to have a fine balance. It is difficult, don't get me wrong. And occasionally, if somebody says something, then you need to apologise quickly for it and move the conversation on. So there might be occasionally where you can tell somebody's going down a path on a phone call where you can foresee that they are about to say something,
Yeah.
and you sort of try and steer the conversation away, or maybe pose a different question, or drop it. If you, because it's our responsibility what goes out, and if we think that a call is heading a certain way, then it's just a case of taking no chances. But people love the debate, people love the heated calls, and that's what it's all about. So yeah, it is nervy, but it's also great fun to do. And when you have a great show where we tend to get on average about say 10, 12 calls on a night. And you've had some good debates with people, and they've come on and they've been passionate and this, that, and the other. Then you do get off afterwards, and you do have that buzz. You do get a real buzz out of it. So no, it is the part of the job that causes not sleepless nights anymore, but certainly there's always nerves going into it.
I can imagine. Is it sort of your discretion as to who comes on and when you sort of perhaps off those callers that you think might be going down the path, or do you say have someone in your ear sort of telling you?
Well, there's always a producer that takes the calls, which is normally the person that's been reading the news on the day. Occasionally, it's one of our, like for Praise or Grumble at the weekend, it'll be one of the sports team that works with us. But there's always somebody there that can help with judgment calls. But essentially, it's your call. You're the presenter, and genuinely, whoever rings up, we try and get on air. And the only reason that you wouldn't get on air is two things. One, if we're too busy and we get too many calls, we genuinely can't squeeze you in. Or there's occasions where somebody may have said or done something silly and we feel that person needs a rest for a little bit.
Yeah.
But apart from that, if you ring up, then we will look to get you on air. Obviously, the producer will warn whoever's coming on about, particularly if there's sensitive stories in the media, like the Ched Evans case a few years ago. I know that Rob and Johnny and Andy went through a few months where it was very difficult and people were saying things on air that were very tricky. And so in that case, it's just a case of warning people when you come on, look, this is the kind of thing you can talk about, this is the can't, and it's about the producer also trying to get a feel of that caller and what they want to talk about. So occasionally they might hear somebody and think, well, I'm not convinced about them. There's occasionally people that ring up and try and prank you.
Right, yeah.
So there's occasionally people that ring up pretending to be a fan of another team and then get on. And then there was a famous one with Rob where somebody rang up and did a call and sounded completely normal for about a minute or so, then just dropped in one of the worst swear words at the end. So again, you've got to be careful of that, and there's a certain element of discretion, particularly with the producer and you. But at the end of the day, if you've only got any concerns, then you've just got to sort of move it along and move on.
Cool.
Adam, obviously you mentioned your career in journalism. What would you say, either commentating on a match, is your sort of greatest match you've been to, or your favourite moment?
There's been quite a few. I mean, I've been very lucky, like I said, to have now been reporting and commentating for the station since 2005, 2006. I'd probably go back to the sort of Wembley and Millennium Stadium trips that I've had.
Yeah.
I'd love, commentating in the Premier League's been a real privilege over the last 2 years. I always look out for the local derbies. I love doing the local derbies because I'm from the area. Done Barnsley, Rotherham this season and whatever else, and they're always just brilliant matches. Done the Steel City derby, went before Sheffield United went up, despite the games being rubbish. That was a real privilege. But I think Barnsley, when they won the playoff final at Wembley, when Doncaster won their playoff final at Wembley against Leeds, was that Wembley? Yeah, that was Wembley against Leeds. And when Donny won the Johnson's Paint Trophy, as it was back in the day at the Millennium Stadium, I was the pitch side reporter for all those three.
Yeah.
So I wasn't full time at the time, but to be able to be on the pitch at Wembley with a team that's just won, and is getting promoted to the Championship, and lap of honours, and you're interviewing all the players on the pitch and looking round, and there's 30, 40,000 Barnsley or Doncaster fans in the stands, and you've got to go on the pitch and be with the players and do all that. Yeah, they're the moments that stand out that you just have to pinch yourself and think, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, I've always sort of dreamed and wanted to do stuff like this, and then you're on, and on that, the Barnsley one when they beat Millwall and went up. This links quite nicely with the previous question. I was interviewing Marley Watkins on the pitch, and he dropped an F-bomb live on air. So you always sort of start with all the players saying, "Oh, you're live on Radio Sheffield, blah blah blah. How do you feel?" Because the emotions are going. And then literally, I think the first thing he said, he dropped an F-bomb. I was like, "Oh, Marley." So we had to leave him and then go and find another player. But you know, it's again, it just shows you live radio, anything can happen. But yeah, brilliant days to be part of. And there's a chance that we could have a couple of teams this year making it into playoff finals, so that'd be amazing if they could.
Yeah.
Sort of to follow on from that, then you said Sheffield United being in the Premier League means you've got to cover a lot of great games over the past 2 years. How do you think our clubs, our South Yorkshire clubs, are viewed across the rest of the country? Because when our teams do well, it's always viewed that it was an unlikely victory, but like Barnsley and Sheffield United challenging for Premier League promotion in the last few years, it's always viewed as unlikely. So how do you think other teams and sort of other journalists at other BBC stations view our clubs?
I think we in this area are hampered by underachievement for a number of years, particularly the two Sheffield clubs. But if you look at the fact that Barnsley have spent more years in the second tier than any other club, then potentially they, over the course of their history, may have had a couple of years further up. I don't think you can look at any of the other clubs too much and think, should they be doing a lot better? I know that Rotherham had some great periods. Doncaster have spent some time in the Championship as well, but that's pretty much the pinnacle that you'd say for them. I mean, if they were to ever get in the Premier League, that really would be a story. But I think the fact that Sheffield United and Sheffield Wednesday have spent so few years in the Premier League, sort of the years that they were big teams in the country, they are still big clubs, huge clubs.
Yeah.
You know, they're still, in terms of attendance size and what they've won and everything else, you'd still potentially put them in both in the top 20 teams in the country. I would certainly argue you would.
Yeah, definitely.
But because of the lack of success really over the last couple of decades, going on 3 decades, Sheffield United, this will be 5 seasons in the Premier League since it began in total.
Yeah.
Sheffield Wednesday managed about 7, 8 before going down. That's now 21 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that does impact things. Excuse me. So I do think that impacts things, but I also think that, I don't know, there's always been this sort of big feeling to the clubs in the Northwest, and Leeds has always been viewed as bigger.
Yeah.
People have always said that Newcastle's bigger. And I think Sheffield, in a way, it's going to get quite deep now. It's just really bad at self-promoting itself.
I completely agree with that.
Get deep.
Yeah. As a place, we should shout about what we have a lot more than what we do. Everything that's going on with Sheffield FC right now. Any other city that I've mentioned, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle, London, Birmingham, if they had the first ever football club, that would be painted all over the city. The city would be using it for X, Y, and Z. So the fact that there's the new stadium coming will be great. But man alive, should it have happened a long time ago? Absolutely, it should have done. So I think all these things come into it. And it's part of the reason why we've got praise or grumble. But it's not there for the praise aspect of it. It's there for the grumble aspect of it.
Yeah.
People in our part of the world like a good moan. We see that. People feel like calling a lot more when the team's doing badly than when they're doing well. And the Sheffield clubs are an extreme example of that locally. And I'd probably say Wednesday of the two, when things are going badly, we get 10s, 20s of Wednesday fans ringing up, moaning. When they're doing well, we don't hear from anybody for a while. And a lot of the other clubs are like that, but just with the experience of the last few years and everything else, whether it's because Wednesday are the biggest club in the area and whatnot, and they still are, even though Sheffield United are up in the Premier League.
Well put.
At the minute. Well, that's just the way it is. If you look at so many different aspects to it, but you do find that you do find that it is an area that likes a moan, likes a grumble, and thankfully it does, because it makes our phone-ins and our shows fantastically good. But it also, I think the thing that over the past year has stood out and it winds me up, and I'm sure it winds a lot of other people up, is the use of the word Sheffield when describing Sheffield United or Sheffield Wednesday.
A disgrace.
It honestly wouldn't happen to any other place. And I don't know what that says about us. I think it potentially is partly the fact that we don't back ourselves as a place enough. We don't shout as much as a place enough. We're more happy when we're losing than when we're winning. Deep down, I think that all plays into it. But it grates.
Imagine that in Manchester. Like
it just wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it's annoying enough when, say, Sheffield United play Manchester United, and it's just and Manchester United referred to as United throughout the commentaries. I don't mind Manchester United being referred to as United in a wider conversation, or when they're playing a team that isn't called United. But I mean, that to me is a little disrespectful. But equally, people like even Sky and others and other outlets just use Sheffield on graphics, and you sort of what it's the fourth largest city in the country by area size, and there's two clubs there that have been around for well over 100 years each. Is it not that hard just to get it right? And then there's also this other club called Sheffield that just happens to be the world's oldest football club, and one of two football clubs in the world to receive a FIFA Order of Merit alongside Real Madrid. So, there you go. I've had a little rant. That does wind me up. And that, in part, answers your question about why and how we're viewed, how we are.
Yeah.
I mean, I completely agree with you, Adam, in terms of Sheffield and the value in itself. It's one of my biggest bugbears. I mean, look at Manchester having the football museum. They've got no right to that, in my opinion. But going back, obviously you mentioned earlier interviewing Marley Watkins. Are there any particular favourites you like to interview?
I mean, currently, there's some great people locally. I mean, Paul Warne is great to interview and just a really good person. So and he's very trusting as well. So you can have a chat on record or off record, and he's a really good person to deal with. But there's nobody really locally that I don't look forward to interviewing right now. Chris Wilder you'd always get nervous interviewing Chris.
Yeah.
Because he had the ability, if you said something slightly wrong or something that he didn't like, it could get quite heated and you might end up having a little bit of a verbal spar, which is good fun at times, but it can get a little nervy. But like James Rowe at Chesterfield's a really laid back guy. I've really been immensely impressed with what he's done this season. I really like Valerian Ishmael, because on the side of the Big Val, on the side of the pitch, he just looks scary. He's bellowing. He's constantly getting instructions on. He's constantly falling out with opposition managers, and a few times this season, if people haven't picked up on it, he hasn't shaken hands with the opposition manager at the end of a game.
No.
That's happened a few times. But then in interviews, he's very personable. He's very calm. He speaks very well. So he's a really interesting character. What a brilliant job that he's done. I mean, there's not occasionally when you get a player who's a little bit different and who just doesn't talk in cliches. It's like a dream.
Yeah.
Because there's some that really don't like the media stuff. There's some that get a bit nervous. And I totally understand that. The footballers, they're not broadcasters. So I get that. But it does mean that quite a few player interviews can be a little bit repetitive. So when you do get somebody like a James Coppinger or that is prepared to, just say things that are a little bit more interesting, that's really good. So we are quite lucky with some people, and we do get a good variety with the fact that we cover 6 pro clubs.
Yeah, do you think that sort of freedom to say what they want comes perhaps with age? Obviously, Coppinger, he's late 30s? Is he
He's
40
40
now?
now.
He's 40.
Yeah,
He was
40,
40 in
yeah.
January, yeah.
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 So,
Do you think as they get
yeah.
older in their career, it's just like, well, they've got less to lose sort of thing, or just like more comfort?
Yeah, I think it like anything else. The more you do it, the more experience you get, the easier it gets. I know some people just don't like doing the media stuff, whatever. And it's not a case of how old they are. They just don't like it, which, again, I understand, but it's part of their job. And it's in contracts and they have to do it. And it's much better if they get on board with it and you can have a good, open relationship. You know, we can't be afraid to criticise any of our local managers if something's going wrong. And that's our job.
Yeah.
But equally, it's not. We're not like a national that can just swoop in and, you know, ask what they want and then go away again. These are people that we interview on a regular basis, sometimes 2, 3, 4 times a week. So
100%.
if you're going to burn your bridges with a club or a player or a manager, then it has to be worthwhile. And don't get me wrong, there have been times in the past. I know there was a time when Barnsley, when we didn't speak to Simon Davey for a time.
He has a bit of a reputation at Oakwell, I've got to say, for being a bit of an edgy character, to say the least.
Yeah, they took umbrage to a few things that had been said on Radio Sheffield and a couple of interviews that were, as far as I can remember, fair but critical. And there was a period where we weren't allowed to speak to the manager. And there was even one game, because I was a Barnsley reporter at the time. Obviously, I wasn't full-time, so I didn't do like the pre-match chats. I just interviewed after the game. And I had to go in via a different entrance with a steward with me because relations had got that frosty.
That is mental.
But this is the point. So it's genuinely not worth it from either side.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of unfair stick given to local media when, you know, fans perhaps put on Twitter, like you said, the questions that they think would be okay to ask, but then, like you said, it's burning those bridges, and then they lose out in the long run.
I think it's more about how you ask them and how you approach it. I think there's no questions entirely unreasonable. And let's take Wednesday as an example. There's been so much anger at the way the club's run over the past year or two, with the points deduction, with finances, with season tickets, with shirts, whatever it is. There's been lots of frustration and anger. And I know, you know, me and the guys from the Star and Dom Howson and Nancy at the Athletic, and we all get the tweets and everything else going, you know, you've got to ask them this and you've got to do that. And why aren't you doing this? And why aren't you doing that? And I can guarantee the majority of the questions people want asking have been asked when we've been in with Dapon Chansiri on the calls or with the managers. It's just the problem is a lot of the answers that you get back aren't the answers to what people want. But you shouldn't be afraid. You shouldn't be afraid to ask anything. But for me, there's a way of doing it.
Yeah.
And when some journalists go about it, they're clearly obviously looking for the you know, that sort of expose factor, that extreme that's going to get a reaction on social or what have you, and that's it's not for me, and I don't think that helps anything.
Definitely. You touched upon Chansiri there, obviously a man that divides the fan base. Have you sort of ever had any personal interaction with him in terms of interviewing him, and if so, what's his character like?
I've been part of calls, and I've been to press conferences, like when when Gary Monk was introduced. Yeah, I did that press conference, and I've been to a fans forum which lasted about 3.5 hours.
I remember that. Yeah.
So I went to that, and we've been on various ones. Look, I think the guy cares about the club.
I agree.
Honestly,
yeah.
I think he's put a hell of a lot of money into it. I don't think he necessarily wants a lot of that money back. That he doesn't necessarily need it. He's had his advisors that, again, have caused a lot of discussion between Wednesday fans as to is he getting the right advice or not. Clearly, there's not too many people within the sort of structure within Wednesday I know people have talked about, since Catherine Mier left, probably a couple of years ago now.
Yeah.
There's not been a chief exec, for example. So should there be more people around him is a fair discussion point, I think. But Wednesday essentially went for it for 2 seasons, came close twice, and didn't make it. And there's so many other clubs in the Championship that have done the same. And with FFP and everything else, once you've done that, you are in a more difficult situation, and that's why Wednesday have got to where they are. I do have some sympathies for him because, like I said, he cares and he's put a lot of money into the club. But there's been a lot of appointments that haven't worked out. There's been some that have. There's been some that potentially could have done. I think if you look at Steve Bruce, for example, if Bruce hadn't have left of his own accord to go to Newcastle, I honestly thought Bruce would have got Wednesday up.
Yeah.
Now Dave Ponchansiri appointed Steve Bruce after going for a couple of foreign coaches and people asking him to appoint an English coach, and he did. So I think there's a lot involved. I think there's some stuff at the minute that it would be, that we've heard this week that the club's under another embargo because the accounts have been delayed in terms of submitting them to the EFL. The club is saying that will all be sorted before the transfer window in the summer, and there's about 10 clubs that this applies to. So that's not necessarily a stick to beat Mr. Chansiri or the club at. That's a byproduct, you'd imagine, of COVID. But, the Wednesday Supporters Trust have wanted the club to be sort of more open on a number of matters, like the season ticket stuff that's really getting to a lot of fans, more regular updates about what's happening with that kind of thing that I think grates a little bit. But it's difficult because football, only one team can win a division every year. Only 3 teams can get promoted. I think people forget this fact. Everybody seems that they've got a divine right to go up and do whatever else, and it doesn't necessarily work out like that. But I had an interesting chat with Steve Chew on Easter Monday evening ahead of the Cardiff game about expectations. He's former head of comms at Wednesday, and we've got Brian Laws there as well, just about whether Wednesday should reevaluate sort of their expectations and how that's impacted on the club. And I'm sure it has, because the club still views itself as a Premier League club, as a team that should be in the top 10. And sort of every decision that's made at the club is viewed in that line. So, it's tough, really tough, and I hope they survive. I think that the performance and the result on Monday was just incredible. I think I described it as ridiculous several times. In context, it was. But if Wednesday can replicate that, they might well survive. And, of course, that'd be much better for their future.
Yeah, it sort of epitomised the change, I guess, we've seen under Moore in terms of style. But I think if move on from Sheffield Wednesday a little bit to Barnsley, and I know Tom and Will have got a couple of questions to ask you.
Yeah, that was far too much Wednesday for my liking. So, obviously, Barnsley this season, me and Tom, we're in dreamland at the moment. What do you think that has been the big difference this season that stopped Barnsley being that kind of League One Championship team? What's made the big difference this season?
Well, you've got to say Big Val, have you known?
Yeah.
Quite simply, I think we've all looked at the past 3 head coach appointments at Barnsley with scepticism. When Daniel Stendel came in, we all went, who? When Gerhard Struber came in, we all went, who? And when Valerian Ismail came in, we all went, who? I don't follow the German and Austrian leagues that closely, I'll admit.
Yeah.
And I'd not really heard of any of them before they came in. And, before Daniel Stendel came in, how the club was approaching transfers and managers and everything else, there was lots of debate and discussion about it. And I think they've made 3 brilliant appointments that have all individually improved the team and improved the club and put the club on a better footing. I think this season, obviously Valerian Ismail wouldn't have succeeded to the degree that he has if the squad that he has wasn't already largely in place. and clearly the club has a way of playing. This is the difference between Wednesday and Barnsley, really. Barnsley have a set approach in terms of how they recruit their players and their managers, their head coaches, and they have a way that they like to do it with young talent that's coming up, and a sort of a way of playing that, by and large, Stendhal, Struber, and Ishmael have had similar ways of playing, not the same. And I think the fact that Valerian has then come in and just tweaked it so that it is more, not long ball, but more direct in terms of when you've got the ball, get the ball forward as quickly as possible. And then essentially when you haven't got the ball, this just insane high press that, excuse me, that means that they work hard, and is why that the 5 subs has been another reason this year, if you're looking at reasons why Barnsley have been able to succeed a bit more, that if you are working that hard and you are able to change 5 players and change all your forward line, it's going to make a massive difference to how you work. But some shrewd acquisitions in January as well. Obviously, Barnsley had a great start under Ishmael before then, and had already won 2/3 of his game in charge before January. But to get DK in and to get Morris in has been extra quality in that rotation up front. And then if you look throughout the side, Callum Britton, what a signing he's been, really consistent. Callum Styles, the vision to move him out to the left from the centre, and he's come on a lot. I think defensively, Solbauer coming in when he did last season really helped other people, and that was a Gerhard Struber signing. Mess Anderson, as he
Day's
actually,
news,
which I've been in an interesting Twitter discussion with Barnsley Football Club today, after they have put pronunciations on their website and had them already, which every club should do. That we could talk about that for a while, but Mess Anderson, as we're now going to call him, has benefited from last year, the experience of a year last year, and looks a different player. And then you've got 2 keepers that are very similar in standard, really, that Collins has done in and played that sort of sweeper keeper role brilliantly. So I just think a lot of factors have come in, but overarchingly, I think it's Valerian Ishmael plus the 5 subs has been really key for the club.
Yeah, and I'm gonna have to press you for this. Do you think Barnsley can make it to the Premier League?
Yes.
Yeah.
There you go. You don't have to press me too hard.
It'd be brilliant, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, it would be. I mean, when Barnsley previously went up was before, obviously, I got into all of this, and I remember Barnsley getting promoted to the Premier League. I was still at school at the time. What was it? 97, 98?
96, 97 when we went up, 97, 98 in the Prem. Yeah.
97, 98 in the Prem. So, yeah, I was still at school at the time. I remember it really well, and it was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It would be incredible again. There's no reason why they couldn't. Barnsley are no smaller a club than Burnley or Bournemouth or a variety of others that have gone up before. So, what it would be an interesting watch as to what it meant for the club's approach and how it goes about things. Sheffield United had previously only spent £4 million as their maximum transfer before they went up to the Premier League in John Egan. Barnsley similarly aren't used to the kind of wages and transfer fees that the Premier League now commands. So that would be fascinating. But can they go up? Absolutely. They've been on an excellent run. They've beaten some brilliant teams. I remember doing TV commentaries due to COVID of Bournemouth and Brentford away that were brilliant. I mean, they were brilliant at Brentford, and Brentford were just totally shocked on that day. And the Bournemouth one, they had to dig a bit deeper on that day. But to go to those 2 places and win, to get, to come back against Reading and get something out of that. I know they nearly cocked it up at the end of the Luton game, but to see that out after having gone through the penalty miss and all that, I just think they're in a great... I think they'll make the playoffs, and then obviously, I think Watford and Norwich will go up automatic.
Yeah.
Barnsley will make the playoffs. I think whoever they play won't want to place Barnsley because the three other teams that make the playoffs will expect to win the playoffs. I don't think Barnsley would expect to win the playoffs, and I think that's what makes Barnsley dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a case of we're just happy to be here, sort of thing, and then it's a potluck, and we don't have the pressure on us that other teams do.
No, and that as well as Valerian and the subs and everything else we've talked about. The fact that Barnsley we're a kick away from going down last season, and literally, I think most Barnsley fans would have snapped your hands off just for a safer year, where they're about 12th to 16th and not in any danger.
Yeah.
Would have happily sufficed this year, but the fact that Barnsley have just been on this amazing run, beat some great teams, and even up to the point of which of getting 50 points, that was still what Valerian was talking about week in, week out. Now it is all a big bonus, and I think the team's doing that, and it's been great to watch, to be honest, with the way that United and Wednesday have struggled, the fact that Rotherham are in a different position, but they're equally struggling this year. To have Barnsley put on the run that it has been huge for the area, not just for Barnsley.
Yeah.
Adam, just one final point from me. Obviously, perhaps the most exciting part for any football fan is sort of the transfer windows. For yourself, sort of, do you enjoy covering transfer windows, or is it sort of a necessary evil?
Do I enjoy it? Not greatly. If I'm being brutally honest, it's part of the job. The world has changed, particularly since I've become full time, in that clubs are a lot more guarded. I think you used to be able to speak to people within clubs a lot easier as a journalist, and there was a lot more contacts that you could make. Don't get me wrong, there's still contacts that we have and other people that you speak to, but the sort of flow of information is a lot more controlled. I have a problem with the amount of money that's spent anyway, because it's just not sustainable. I also don't think it's fair within the system. Again, this is another whole 2 hours, really. That the way the Premier League is and the way that the rich and powerful clubs control everything within our game, I just don't think's fair. And I think the money should be there should be greater distribution, and all the sort of salary caps and sort of limits and everything else, for me, are things that we should be looking at. We've seen what's happened within COVID and how everybody struggled. And football has missed a bit of an opportunity to try and change a bit. But, in terms of everything with that, transfer window wise, it is interesting. It is, it's always great when you get a new signing in, and we always have great discussions on the programme. There's always uproar when one of your big players leaves. So it's still a great conversation and discussion point. It just becomes a bit of a farce, really.
Yeah.
The way it all plays out, and the fact that there is this sort of insatiable appetite that, we must sign players and we must do this, and if we don't sign players, well, there's teams that have been promoted having not signed anyone, and there's teams that have been relegated having signed about 10. So it is overly inflamed, I think, from a hype and a money perspective. But does that take away from the fact that when you do land somebody big, and we do get a big sign in our area, it is exciting. There's nothing about it. And it's great for us, like when you get a new player in, somebody new to interview, somebody new to speak to.
Yeah.
Like DK and Morris and whatnot, when they came in, I spoke to Carlton Morris a few times. He's great, so a really interesting guy. Sam Hutchinson coming back to Wednesday, he's a really interesting guy. So there is, like, from that perspective, it's quite interesting. But yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of deadline days and transfers, because you pretty much spend the entire month on social media looking out at who's announcing stuff, constantly badgering press officers at clubs, trying to keep across what all the sort of print journalists and other people and rumours that are flying around. And our job's pretty much gone from well, the digging and everything else, because there's only so much you can do to counter in rumour. You know, a lot of we do is pretty much like, we'll probably tweet more about we expect this to be happening than this is, we've looked into this and we understand that X aren't interested in this player, or they're not interested in this. So yeah,
I think it tends to be more sort of, you might see something linked and you'll go investigate yourself, or will it be you get told something? What's the sort of dynamic there? What's more likely to happen?
Could be either. I mean, a lot of the time, because there's so many different sources now out there, and so many sort of outlets, and there's like there's some quite sort of reputable companies on social, and there's others that pop up that are just nonsense. So you do have to make a sort of judgment call as to what you do look at. But you know, occasionally we'll get tip-offs about this, that, and the other from various sources, because that's the nature of the occupation. But equally, you'll have a look at the rumours, you'll have a look at who's saying what, and see if there's anything in it. Sometimes there is, a lot of the times there isn't.
Yeah, I mean, is it common for agents just to sort of put it out there in the media and it often come to nothing, or do you see less and less of that?
Occasionally, it depends on the agent and the player, because I mean, by and large, agents get a bad rep, and there are a few bad eggs out there. But by and large, the majority of them are really good. And you know, we've got a variety of agents as contacts that you're able to sound out, and then occasionally they might come to you. But by and large, like I said, there's so many sources and different places where things can come from, and the football clubs now have seemingly much greater control over the information that flows in and outside of their clubs. It just makes the whole situation a bit more difficult.
Yeah. Tom and Will, have you got any other questions you'd like to add?
No, I think we've covered everything that we wanted there. It's been, I think it's been a very interesting episode, and I think we've got to see what you're like on him, because as much as we'd probably like to hear more of your opinion, you are often the peacemaker on praise or grumble, and sometimes you have to talk people down rather than add your own view. But thank you very much for coming on.
But yeah, no, absolute. Really grateful for you asking me. And you are right. It is a delicate balance, because we try and make it about the callers and about their opinion. It's about their views, but equally, you've got to, within rhyme or reason, give your thoughts on a matter, and that's right as well. But that doesn't mean that you sort of railroad all the people that disagree with you, if you get what I mean. So you have to sort of look at both sides of it and play a lot of devil's advocate on there and put some counter arguments that might not necessarily be what you want. But yeah, it's good, it's challenging, and it's fun, and I'm very grateful to do it.
Good stuff. Thanks for listening. We are now on Apple Podcasts, so please do give us a follow on there, and also give us a 5-star review. It really helps us out. Subscribe on YouTube, like on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.
Cheers, guys.